Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we explore heartwarming tales of courage, transformation, and human connection. Today, we bring you the story of Richard Bennett, a lonely billionaire whose life is forever changed by the bravery and love of two remarkable children on a snowy Christmas Eve. On a frosty Christmas Eve, the Crestwood estate stood blanketed in snow, its towering facade casting a shadow over the quiet countryside. Inside the grand mansion, Richard Bennett, a billionaire known more for his wealth than his warmth, adjusted his silk tie in front of a gilded mirror. At 57, Richard embodied success, silver hair immaculately combed, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. Yet, for all his accomplishments, there was an emptiness in his sharp blue eyes, a hollowness etched by years of isolation in the cold halls of his estate. The Crestwood estate, once a symbol of his family's legacy, had become a monument to Richard's solitude. Its Gothic architecture and vast, echoing halls lacked the comfort of a home. Tonight was no different. Richard, immersed in his spreadsheets and reports, found distraction in numbers rather than memories of festive Christmases he had long since abandoned. Downstairs, the estate's kitchen hummed with quiet activity. Sarah, the housekeeper, was preparing a modest Christmas dinner, though she doubted Richard would even notice. Her 10-year-old twins, Lily and Jack, played quietly in the abandoned greenhouse behind the mansion. The two had transformed the forgotten space into a secret garden, tending to it with love and care, a stark contrast to the lifeless grandeur of Crestwood. Lily, with her striking green eyes and curious nature, often wondered about the man who owned the mansion. She had glimpsed him a few times, a stern figure, always preoccupied, his presence as cold as the winter air. Jack, more reserved, found solace in books and rarely spoke of the mysterious man who paid their mother's wages. Together, they created their own little world, one filled with laughter and imagination, untouched by the loneliness that seemed to engulf the estate. That evening, as the scent of cinnamon wafted from the kitchen, Sarah noticed a faint, acrid smell mingling with it. Her eyes darted to the old electrical panel in the corner. Sparks flew from the frayed wires, and within moments, flames began licking hungrily at the wooden cabinetry. Panic surged through her as smoke filled the room. She rushed to the service elevator, intending to warn Richard, but the aged mechanism groaned and jolted to a halt, trapping her inside. In the greenhouse, Lily noticed the orange glow flickering through the mansion's windows. She nudged Jack, her voice trembling. "Jack, look, something's wrong. Mom's in there." Jack's freckled face turned pale, but determination quickly replaced his fear. He grabbed Lily's hand. "We have to help her." The twins raced toward the mansion, their breath visible in the icy air. Entering through the back door, they were met with thick, suffocating smoke. The grand halls that had always felt cold and imposing were now a maze of danger. Jack darted toward the service stairs, his mind set on reaching the third floor where Richard worked, while Lily followed the sound of her mother's desperate cries. "Mom!" Lily yelled, clawing at the elevator doors with her small hands. Inside, Sarah's muffled voice called back, her tone laced with fear. "Lily, no! Get out of here!" But Lily refused to leave, summoning strength she didn't know she had. She pried the elevator doors open, just enough to glimpse her mother's smoke-covered face. Determined, she continued pulling, her fingers aching from the effort. Finally, the gap widened, and Sarah stumbled out, coughing violently but alive. Lily threw her arms around her mother, tears streaking her soot-covered face. Meanwhile, Jack reached the third floor and burst into Richard's study. The boy's sudden appearance startled the billionaire, who was still lost in his spreadsheets, oblivious to the chaos below. Smoke had begun to seep under the heavy wooden door. "Mr. Bennett, there's a fire. We have to leave." Jack's voice cracked with urgency. Richard looked up, his expression a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" he demanded. "There's no time for that," Jack insisted. Stepping closer, he grabbed Richard's hand, pulling him toward the door. The touch froze Richard in place, not from resistance, but from shock. It had been years since someone had touched him without deference or hesitation. The fire's roar grew louder, the flames consuming the ornate corridors with alarming speed. Finally, Richard allowed Jack to lead him out of the study. Together, they navigated the smoky hallways. The walls lined with portraits of long-gone ancestors reduced to shadows in the encroaching inferno. The once grand estate was crumbling around them. As they descended the stairs, they reunited with Sarah and Lily in the main hall. For a brief moment, Richard's eyes met Sarah's. Her gaze was fierce, protective, and filled with defiance, a stark contrast to the submissive demeanor he had always assumed of her. In turn, his own expression reflected a dawning realization. He had never truly seen her before, let alone the children who had just saved his life. The family, along with Richard, escaped into the snow-covered garden just as the flames overtook the mansion. The towering structure collapsed behind them, its grandeur reduced to ash in mere moments. Standing in the cold, Richard turned to Sarah, his voice trembling as he asked, You saved me. Why?" Still holding her children close, Sarah looked him square in the eye and replied, "Because it was the right thing to do." Her words struck Richard like a blow, cutting through the icy barrier he had built around his heart. As firefighters battled the blaze, Richard stood in stunned silence, watching his empire crumble. Yet, within that ruin, something else had begun to take shape, a glimmer of humanity he had long forgotten. That night, he realized the fire hadn't just consumed Crestwood Estate. It had ignited the spark of something new within him. In the aftermath of the fire, Richard Bennett sat in his cottage, a small but warm and welcoming structure tucked away on the vast Crestwood Estate. It had been years since he had spent any significant time there, and he was struck by how different it felt compared to the grand mansion that now lay in ruins. The cottage wasn't adorned with marble floors or gilded chandeliers, but it had something Crestwood Mansion never did, a sense of comfort. That night, Richard extended an unexpected invitation. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice devoid of the usual authority that once defined him. "Bring the children and come inside. You'll catch your death out here." Sarah hesitated, her instincts as a housekeeper urging her to decline. For over a decade, she had worked for Richard, navigating the strict rules and unspoken boundaries of his world. To cross the threshold of his personal space now felt unthinkable. But the cold was unforgiving, and the twins clung to her with soot-streaked faces and shivering bodies. "Please," Richard added, his tone almost pleading, "it's the least I can do." Reluctantly, Sarah stepped inside with Lily and Jack, who couldn't hide their awe at the cozy interior. The warm light from the fireplace illuminated the wooden beams of the ceiling, and the smell of burning pine filled the air. It felt like a world apart from the austere grandeur of Crestwood Mansion. Lily ran her fingers over the polished table, whispering, "It's beautiful." Richard watched her with a mixture of guilt and fascination. For years, he had lived surrounded by people who worked tirelessly to maintain his life of luxury. Yet he had never truly seen them. Now, in the quiet presence of Sarah and her children, he felt a pang of regret for all the years he had spent ignoring the humanity of those who had served him. As they sat around the fire, the silence was broken by Jack's quiet but curious voice. "Mr. Bennett, why don't you have a family?" The question hung in the air, sharper and more piercing than Richard could have anticipated. He stared into the fire for a moment, his jaw tightening. "I suppose I never made time for one," he admitted, his voice low. "And I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Lily asked, her green eyes fixed on him with an innocent intensity. Richard hesitated before answering. "Of getting it wrong, of not being enough." The twins exchanged a glance, their young faces filled with an understanding that felt far beyond their years. Richard looked at Sarah, who was holding her children close, her warmth and love for them evident in every gesture. For the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong to think that vulnerability was a weakness. Perhaps, he thought, it was the very thing he had been missing all along. Over the next few days, Richard found himself drawn to Sarah and the twins. They remained in the cottage while plans for rebuilding Crestwood Mansion were put in motion. What began as awkward, polite conversations turned into something more natural. Richard started asking questions about their lives, their struggles, their dreams, and, for the first time, he listened. He learned that Sarah, despite her modest means, had always made sure her children felt loved and supported. She spoke of late nights spent sewing costumes for school plays and how the greenhouse had become a sanctuary for the twins. They've always had big dreams, she said, her voice tinged with pride. I just try to make sure they never feel like they're missing out. Lily's boundless curiosity and Jack's quiet wisdom began to chip away at Richard's stoic exterior. He found himself laughing at Lily's endless questions and marveling at Jack's thoughtful observations. In their presence, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in decades: warmth. But the transformation didn't stop there. Richard's newfound connection with Sarah and her children inspired him to look beyond his own world. One morning, as they sat around the small dining table, Lily asked, "Will Crestwood Mansion be the same when it's rebuilt?" Richard thought for a moment before shaking his head. "No," he said firmly. "It won't be the same. It shouldn't be." "What will it be like?" Jack asked, his curiosity piqued. Richard's lips curved into a rare smile. "It'll be a home, not just for me, but for everyone who's been a part of this place." The twins' eyes lit up. "Does that mean we'll have a big Christmas tree next year?" Lily asked, her voice filled with excitement. "Bigger than you can imagine," Richard replied, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "And not just a tree, there'll be a library, too," he added, glancing at Jack. "A place where anyone can read or learn." "In a garden?" Lily chimed in. "Yes," Richard said, looking at Sarah. "A greenhouse like the one you've made your own, but this one will be for everyone." In that moment, Richard's vision for Crestwood Estate began to take shape. It would no longer be a cold monument to isolation, but a place filled with life, laughter, and community. The fire that had destroyed the mansion had also ignited something within him, a desire to rebuild. Not just the walls of the estate, but the relationships he had neglected for so long. For Sarah, Lily, and Jack, the changes in Richard were both surprising and heartening. He wasn't the distant, unapproachable man they had always known. He was opening up, showing a side of himself that none of them had ever expected to see. And in doing so, he was not just transforming the estate, but himself as well. The ruins of Crestwood Mansion stood as a stark reminder of all Richard Bennett had lost and everything he had yet to gain. Where the grand estate had once loomed over the countryside with imposing grandeur, now there was only ash and rubble. But for the first time, Richard didn't see this as a tragedy. Instead, he saw an opportunity, a chance to rebuild. Not just a mansion, but his life and the lives of those around him. Construction began within weeks. Workers flooded the grounds, their voices carrying through the frosty air as they cleared debris and laid the foundations for a new Crestwood. But this time, the plans were different. Richard was determined that the estate would not simply be a lavish home for one man. It would be a place of community, warmth, and connection. It would belong not just to him, but to everyone who had been a part of its history. Sarah and her children often joined him at the construction site. Lily, ever curious, peppered the workers with questions about their tools and techniques, while Jack quietly observed, occasionally offering surprisingly insightful suggestions. Richard, who had once been distant and unapproachable, now found himself at the center of their lively discussions, his heart warmed by the children's enthusiasm. One day, as they stood together amidst the bustle, Richard turned to Sarah. "I want Crestwood to be alive," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Not just a house, but a home, a place where people feel valued and seen." Sarah looked at him, her eyes softening. "That's a beautiful idea," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But it's not just the house that needs to change. Richard, it's you." Her words struck a chord deep within him, and he nodded. "I know," he admitted, "and I'm working on that." The transformation wasn't limited to the estate. Richard began venturing beyond the walls of Crestwood, reaching out to the local community. He attended town meetings, surprising the council with his genuine interest in creating programs to benefit the area. Crestwood isn't just mine anymore, he explained to them one snowy morning. It belongs to all of us. Word of Richard's change began to spread. Former staff members, many of whom had left the estate years ago, began to return, drawn by the promise of a renewed Crestwood. Among them was Mrs. Perkins, a retired cook who had served the Bennett family for decades. When she arrived, tears glistened in her eyes as she saw the new plans for the estate. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," she said, her voice trembling. "You're turning Crestwood into something truly remarkable." Richard smiled, a warmth in his expression that had once been absent. "Thank you, Mrs. Perkins," he said, "and please call me Richard." The new Crestwood began to take shape, its design reflecting not only elegance, but a sense of belonging. A grand library was built, its shelves waiting to be filled with books for anyone who wished to read or learn. The greenhouse, once abandoned, was rebuilt into a communal garden, a place where families could gather and grow flowers, just as Lily and Jack had done in their secret sanctuary. And at the heart of the estate, a towering Christmas tree was erected, its branches adorned with handmade ornaments contributed by every family in the community. When Christmas Eve arrived, the partially rebuilt mansion was ready to welcome its first celebration. The Great Hall, once cold and empty, now radiated warmth and joy. Families from the town gathered, their laughter filling the air as children ran between the tables. Sarah and her children stood by Richard's side, their presence a testament to the bonds that had grown between them. As the festivities reached their peak, Richard stepped forward to address the crowd. His voice trembled with emotion as he spoke. "This past year has been the most humbling of my life. I've learned that wealth means nothing without people to share it with. Thank you, all of you, for teaching me the true meaning of family." The room erupted into applause, but it was the smiles on Sarah's and the twins' faces that meant the most to him. They had saved him not just from the fire, but from a lifetime of loneliness and detachment. After his speech, Lily and Jack approached him with a small wrapped gift. "This is for you," Lily said, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. Richard opened the box to find a photo album, its pages filled with snapshots of the past year, moments of rebuilding, shared meals, and laughter. "So you never forget," Jack added softly. Richard knelt down, pulling the twins into a heartfelt embrace. "I won't," he promised. "Not ever." That night, as snow fell softly outside, the laughter and joy within Crestwood spilled into the world. For the first time in decades, Richard felt the warmth of belonging. The estate, once a cold monument to isolation, now radiated light, love, and connection. Crestwood was no longer just a house. It was home. Through the story of Richard Bennett, Sarah, and her children Lily and Jack, we uncover profound lessons about transformation, love, and the power of human connection. Richard, a man who once lived in isolation, surrounded by material wealth but devoid of purpose, learns that true richness comes not from possessions, but from the relationships we nurture. His near-death experience and the bravery of 2 children spark a journey of self-discovery. Richard's transformation teaches us that it's never too late to change, to open one's heart, and to find meaning in giving and belonging. Sarah, a single mother with quiet strength, reminds us of the resilience it takes to create joy and stability even in the face of struggle. Her love for her children and her unyielding sense of duty guide her decisions, showing the power of selflessness and unwavering resolve in the most challenging moments. Lily and Jack, with their innocence and courage, are symbols of hope and empathy. Their bravery in saving their mother and Richard reveals that even the smallest acts of kindness and courage can ignite profound change. Together, this family teaches Richard and us that love, empathy, and shared purpose are the foundations of a truly fulfilling life. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope and transformation. We hope the story of Richard, Sarah, Lily, and Jack inspires you to see the power of love and connection in your own life. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to rediscover humanity. See you next time.